Okay, welcome. I am Heather Pierce Campbell, the legal website warrior. I'm an attorney and legal coach based here in Seattle, Washington. Welcome to another episode of Guts, Grit, and Great Business. So I'm so excited to have my new friend, Anke. Look at me do it
Excellent.
wrong. Anke Herrmann. I'm going to edit that part out. I'm so excited to have my new friend, Anke Herrmann, with me. And Anke, I love her specialty. I'm so excited to bring this conversation to people because I can personally attest to it being an area that keeps people stuck, right? We all have our own journey with technology, and but Anke is way more than a tech brain. I love her creativity side. Her story involves a lot of creativity. So let's introduce Anke. Sorry, I lost my page. There it is. So I'm going to edit that part out. Just ignore that little blip. Anke is originally from Germany. She lived in Australia and the UK before deciding to quit her IT job in London in 2004 to move to Spain and start a sewing business with nothing but a love for sewing and plenty of enthusiasm. Today, she brings her curiosity, creativity, intuition, plus her analytical mind, business and tech knowledge to the table to help others turn their passion into a business. She hosts the Passion Business podcast and helps others launch their own show. She recently published her book, Taming the Tech Monster: How to Rise Above Tech Frustration and Build Your Business Online with Joy and Confidence, is also co-author of Revival, Women Embracing Their Superpowers, Volume 1, and contributor to the Magnificent Metamorphosis magazine. Anke is a passion business coach, certified clarity coach and mentor. She's a business and online tech mentor, podcast host, author, dressmaker, and crazy dog lady. I love that so much. I'm also a dog lady, but we don't have our doggies anymore in our life. But I when we pass other people with dogs, I want to adopt them all. Anke, welcome to my show. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, and remind me, where are you in the world?
I'm based in the south of Spain, like very south,
Oh,
very
okay.
bottom, in the province of
Awesome.
Cadiz, for anybody who knows Spain.
Wow. So I have visited very northern Spain, San Sebastian. It's been a
Yeah,
while, but we were mostly in France, and then we popped across the border for a day or two and then went
yeah.
back. Well, so talk to me about how you got started. I mean, your path is very interesting. I love, your experience in moving. I mean, it sounds like you had a lot of courage to move and relocate and start totally new things. I love that you left an IT job in London to go start a sewing business.
As
I
one does.
Yes, I was in London near that time. Not, I mean, it was a couple of years. I don't know how long you were in London.
Yes.
A few years. Yeah, so
Mhm.
I was in London. I lived in London for a summer, and it would have been 2001.
Oh, so we could have bumped into each other then.
That's right.
Yep.
That's right.
Small
Uh,
world.
that's right. So talk to me about your IT job in London.
Well, I stumbled into software development while I was living in Australia, and that was, the late 90s, and that
Hmm.
whole um, like how call it cyber bubble, basically
Yes.
this there was this whole boom of that industry. And I really didn't have any plans to go to the UK. It was just one of those things that in Australia, it was really like if you had some London experience on your resume, that really made your resume. And so the plan was to go to London for 6 months, for a year. I didn't even sell my car to start with. And, basically just get a contract and go back, right? And pick up some really cool job in Sydney. That was the plan. And so that's how I arrived in London, just really to ride the IT wave,
Oh,
basically. And then, and
interesting.
then one contract turned into another and into another. And 5 years later, you thought, oh, well,
So,
it's one of those life happens as well. You're busy making other plans. Yeah.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that's fascinating. So,
Yeah.
what were you doing before getting into IT? What was your, I guess, what was your entrance into the IT world?
My entrance in the IT world was pure frustration because I was
Mm.
actually a trained translator, right? So I finished uni, my degree is in translation. And so I
Oh.
went for technical translation because I grew up in East Germany. So my whole upbringing, education, or where everything always had a bit of a technical taste to it. And so I moved to Australia with my then husband. But as you can tell, it didn't last long. Um,
We
so
all need at least one of those under our
I
belts.
know, I know. So it was one of those, you'd call false friends when you think you talk about the same thing. You use the same words,
Mhm.
but you actually understand something totally different. So I moved to Australia with him. And
Mm.
the plan was, oh, Sydney is really multicultural. You can just get a job as a translator. Well, boy, was I wrong. It was difficult to find a job. It was then when I found one, it was probably the most stressful job that I've ever had, the
Oh.
worst paid. So it was very quickly, it became apparent that I wasn't going to last. Like
And
that
what?
wasn't, what I wanted to do. Counting
Yes.
down, I think it really hit me there that counting down the days and the hours to Friday wasn't how I wanted to live my life.
Yeah. And was this the job? I remember, and I don't know where I found this, but when I was reading up and trying to learn a bit about you, is this the job where you were, was it a legal translation job where somebody would hand you like
I thought you'll love that one.
yes,
Yeah.
a brief or something and be like, please have this done by Monday. And you're like,
Yes.
excuse me?
Yes, it was a general translation agency, but we had
Oh, various
solicitors as
clients.
clients, right? And yeah, it was that ignorance. Like
Mm.
nobody had a clue what was involved, but everybody somehow thought, can't be that, can't be much to it. And so, there were always expectations about how long it would take and how much it would cost that had nothing to do with the work involved. So I really
Yes.
knew that, well, I wasn't going to last there. And so literally in my frustration, what I did is I sent out my resume kind of anywhere, anybody who would have it. And not having had any other work experience in Australia made this really hard, because I was
Mm.
out of uni like a couple of years. So
Yeah.
my resume was pretty kind of slim anyway.
Yeah.
And then the only proper job I'd had before the translation agency was back in Germany. Oh, well, that's overseas. We don't really we can't
Mm.
check up on that. We don't speak German. This is too far away.
Yeah.
We don't care about that. If it doesn't exist. So it took a while to find somebody who had an open enough mind to see that just because I haven't done something before doesn't mean I can't do it.
Right.
Right. So, and I think if you change career, if you want to change career, you always need somebody who gives you have nothing to prove it yet,
Yeah.
and it
Gives you a
takes,
chance.
yeah, and
Yeah.
it just usually takes a while until you find somebody. And then the person who gave me that chance was basically a guy who founded a software company. That's how I ended up in the software company. And I quickly realized that, I'm really curious about what are these guys doing? That
Yeah.
whole idea, programming for me was like translating without all the exceptions.
Yeah.
It was like translating, just easier, you know.
Yeah. That's
And
right.
so that's how I got into that, and I got hooked on it pretty quickly, and I really enjoyed it. And then colleagues would actually come and say, you should take this whatever industry exam, you could get a job in this. And I'm like, no, 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 why? No. First of all, I wouldn't, it didn't even occur to me that I could actually be good enough to do that as a professionally. And the other
Yeah.
part, I wasn't, the idea of working in an all male office didn't really
Mm-hmm.
pull me in. It was like, I
Mm-hmm.
don't really want to have to be twice as good to be half as accepted.
That's
But then
right.
it was really like, you know what? What's the worst thing that can happen? Either I don't pass the exam, then the question is solved anyway. I did pass the exam, and then it was like, well, I can try and go for a job, and if I don't like it, then I don't have to keep doing it. And
Hmm.
it turned out that all the worries I had about working in this male-dominated industry, like in my case, weren't true. Like I never
Oh.
once felt that I had to be better or had to deliver more or any of it. I really never felt that I was, you know, not accepted or somehow measured differently. So that turned out, you know,
Mm.
was one of those assumptions that fortunately didn't come through. And yeah, I really, really enjoyed working in software development.
Oh, that's fabulous. Well, it's interesting. I mean, it makes me wonder what experience you'd had in your life, right, that led you to think a couple things. One, that you couldn't do that work professionally, right? And maybe it's just that piece about transitions and not having experience in it before, education in it. Um,
Mm,
but then also, like your experience probably working in as a translator in the legal industry, even just for certain clients. I mean, I can speak about my experience in the legal world, which is heavily, heavily dominated by men, right?
mm.
But it's so interesting that that turned out not to be the case for you. Like the actual work,
Yeah,
was
yeah,
not that way.
yeah. And I do remember what made me question whether I would be able to work in there because
Hmm.
I thought, you know, I was 29 at the time and I thought I had too much to catch up with. That was
Ah,
it wasn't so much that I knew maths was always like, yeah, I'm good at that. It's
yep,
my thing, you know. So
yep,
that part, like the technical part itself, I didn't really I didn't think that I wasn't capable, but I thought I was way too behind because I thought the people I would be working with were the ones who'd been programming video games since they were 14.
right.
Right. And I just thought there was so much to catch. I won't have time to ever catch up to what they're doing. And
Well, and the reason I ask that question is I think a lot of people keep themselves out of even exploring tech for reasons like this.
yes,
It's going to be too hard. I haven't been in that world. It's going to take
mm-hmm,
too much time and for
yes,
some, that experience is true,
true. Yes,
right?
absolutely, absolutely. And the other part of it was that I thought that my background in linguistics was sort of the thing that had wasted my time until then. you know, it was, and it turned out to be the biggest gift.
Hmm.
You know, the fact that I came in from this totally odd angle and the linguistics background put me in that position in a software project that I could understand the technical part, but then I could talk to clients in a
Yeah.
way that they could hear. Right? So it actually worked out a perfect combination. So it wasn't a hindrance at all. And I think that's a lot of people feel that when they change careers or start a business that feeling like you're a baby, you're starting from scratch and you never really do.
Right, right. Well, and I've said to people, especially because I've done a fair amount of mentoring, young attorneys and talked with folks even outside of the legal industry about how, at least my personal belief is that you never, I mean, once you get far enough away from your education or your experiences, I know sometimes you don't always know how they're going to support the next step or lead to the next thing, but looking back, you never regret an education.
So true.
And, ultimately the dots do connect and each step does build skills towards the next thing, even if it's not, I think, obviously clear.
Yeah.
So, so once you realized like you're actually good at it, right? You could do it. How did you talk to me a little bit about how it then became your passion?
Well, it actually, the fascination was there right from the beginning. Like the fact that you
Mm,
could like type something to get a computer to do something, I found that endlessly fascinating. And I think the more I got into it, the more I could see that it had that perfect mixture between structure and skill and plenty of room for creativity. And I didn't really expect
Mm,
that. But the more I got into it, the more I could see it and the more I really enjoyed it. So
mm,
yeah, and it was never boring either because every project's different. Every time, like some, and especially I worked for a while in like a company that would offer to build custom solutions for all different kind of clients.
mm-hmm.
So then you got to work in the Sydney casino for a few months on some project where it was about setting up restaurants. Then there was a bank where it was all about home loans, and then there was an insurance company, and it was all kind of different things. And every time you got to learn in depth how they run their business and what they're actually doing, and I found that absolutely fascinating. And then
Mm-hmm.
build a solution that basically makes their life easier, that streamlines their work. So yeah, it was
Yeah.
fabulous. Mm.
Yeah, you got to apply your problem solving skills. But it looks like there's a time you got out of tech, right? And started doing other things. So talk to us about that period of going into um, your beginnings of a sewing business.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've been sewing as a hobby for as long as I can remember, so that wasn't something new.
Mm-hmm.
But I remembered the moment I knew I was going to leave the IT industry, and that was in the middle of nowhere in this little Andes village in Peru. And it was this tiny village, and they were specializing in um, carving out little boxes out of pumpkins and sell them to tourists. Like that
Mm-hmm.
village was famous for that. And so there's this little old man, you could like, how you see these photos all wrinkly and no teeth, and he'd carved out this little box for me, and he'd explained, what the story, what there was. And all of a sudden he turns around and says, "¿Y tú qué haces?" And what do you do? And I'm like, boy, well, how am I explaining that? Right?
Yeah.
And it was literally like, okay, so I work in this software project where we build a workflow application for it's like, what the heck? And it was really like, if I can't explain to the simple man what I do, heck,
Mm-hmm.
something isn't right. And
Mm.
it was really that moment where I thought, I don't know. It's just, I think it's time to go back to the drawing board. And also I could see the software industry shifting. It was going away from a team of software developers creating software for a client, then all of a sudden every project needed to be outsourced. Everything
Mm.
was outsourcing to India was like the thing. And even though the game they play is really transparent, nobody really cared. So all the opportunities in that industry ended up being in project management. And that's just not my thing. Like I knew, like I'm a creator. I want to have an idea and design a solution and implement that solution to have something tangible at the end, right?
Mm-hmm.
And project management, just like for me, it's sitting in meetings, chasing milestones. It's just like I knew that's not for me. So I could see there was no future. And then I really thought, let's take a step back. Literally, like if I could have anything, if I didn't have to worry about qualifications, language, paperwork, anything, what would I do? And yeah, I don't know. I saw myself with a small sewing studio offering
Mm.
custom solutions. And the next thought was, okay, so what exactly is stopping me? And literally was a case of I couldn't think of anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Wow.
was just like, let's just see what happens. So that was my business plan, basically.
I love that. Backtracking to that moment where you could not describe what you did to this man in Peru. I'm curious, what was the feeling you were having? Was it about that work not being meaningful or feeling irrelevant because you couldn't describe it to him? What was it?
Yeah, it seemed so removed to, especially, I think that same situation probably wouldn't have happened elsewhere, but there,
Mm,
where that connection to the earth, to that simple life was really
mm,
strong. And
mm,
all of a sudden, my work seemed so abstract,
mm.
so irrelevant,
Yes.
you know, that I just couldn't feel it. It was like, I don't know, it just lacked that sense of, yeah, it sort of didn't nourish the soul, basically.
Yeah. Wow. So tell us a little bit about your transition into your sewing business. You told us the roots of it. What did you learn when you actually went into the business of sewing?
Yeah, yeah. I think sometimes I think that enthusiasm and not having an idea actually helped.
Mm.
It made it difficult, but it also made it possible because there was no fear of failure, right? So that was really the thing. But um, I actually immediately thought of that when I saw the name of your podcast, and I'm like, yeah, great, yep. Because in looking back, it always sounds so romantic, right? It sounds like, oh, you just moved to Spain and started a sewing business. But what people usually don't realize is that it took a year of scratching doors,
Right.
of dance schools and basically being rejected, and like, oh no, we don't need anybody, or oh yeah, we could use you if you could work 24 hours without charging, so and literally looking back, it took over a year before I got, because I didn't know anybody, looking back, there's a few things I do differently, obviously, but it was really that I wouldn't allow somebody saying no to me, I wouldn't let that discourage me.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that is really the, yeah, that thing. Well, okay, I don't expect this to be smooth. And
That's the grit part of the equation, right? So
yeah,
for me,
absolutely.
the way I distinguish between guts and grit, and you hear the word courage thrown around with both of those words, but to me, courage or guts, right, is, and I've said this before in a previous discussion, but it's really the activation energy
Mm-hmm.
required to make that decision.
Yep.
But the grit is what keeps you enduring, what keeps you on the path,
Yeah. Yeah.
picking yourself up after no, after no, after no.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think the most unexpected lesson was really that it was a crash course in personal development. I never realized,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because when I looked at what I expected to be challenging, like, okay, would Spanish flamenco dancer even consider getting a dance costume made from this would-be German dressmaker? Because, I had no formal training in dressmaking. I knew I could do it, but I couldn't prove it. There we go again. Um, and so I wasn't sure whether they trust me. But again, that didn't turn out to be a problem because apparently, being German, immediately I got certain qualities attributed to me without having to prove anything. So immediately people thought, oh, she must be good at it. So she must be like on the craft side. She must be good technically. She's going to be reliable. So all these German traits were attributed to me. But not being able to say no was what really hit me hard, because if there was a cultural difference, I'd lived in Germany, Australia, UK, and basically in general, this being Mrs. Nice Girl with yes as the default answer had never been a problem. And all of a sudden, I found myself in a situation where people would take ruthless advantage of that.
Mm,
And so slowly and steadily, as my business grew and as I had more and more clients, they wanted more and more. And anytime you do something, the next person wants it quicker, the next person wants more, the other person wants it cheaper, right? So, and it was that constantly building pressure until it really, the kettle exploded 8 years later.
mm.
And yeah, I was literally, if you look at the photo, pretty anorexic, was one of those, you, I don't know whether there's a definition for burnout, but I'm pretty sure that was that. It was, we would have met in the street and you go, hey, how are you going? And I'd be bursting into tears. So really
Mm.
physically, emotionally, yeah, I just couldn't. couldn't go any further. And it was really that moment where I thought, what on earth am I doing?
And
And
that was
for a while, yeah, I was grumpy at this. I thought it was a cultural thing, and I thought it was all a Spanish problem until I realized, well, I can't really, who am I to think I can change a whole culture? How about looking in the mirror?
Mm. And that was 8 years in. That was after 8 years of being in that sewing
Yep,
business.
yep. And it was really a matter of stopping and saying, well, look, if this is what live your dream is, I want nothing to do with it. I'm sick
Mm,
of it. I'm absolutely sick of it. But I think in hindsight, unfortunately, it got me right in the middle of the economic crisis. I did look for jobs. And when I saw what was, what people were looking for, and even the job descriptions, the way they were described were already like, oh God, just by the way you describe what you're looking for, I already know you're going to be a nightmare to work for,
right.
And so I thought, well, no, let's just make another dress, right? But it was really that moment where I thought, no, I have to take ownership and really looked
Mm,
at like, hang on, what is it? And the moment I could see through that my pressure had never come from my demanding Spanish clients, the moment I could see my own story play out, because it was never about them wanting something. It was always about me being convinced that saying no would have this, like, it would be this inevitable chain of horrible consequences.
right.
They'd get upset, then they wouldn't order again. And it's a small town, small industry. They talk behind my back, and all their friends wouldn't come. And basically saying no in my mind, had me in the street within
Right.
like a month. So I thought I
Interesting.
couldn't say no, but had nothing to do with them. And the moment I saw that, like, oh God, it's that moment when you realize you've been really stupid, but at the same time liberating, because
Mm,
literally the whole thing changed around like 100, like my experience of it, my clients never
mm,
knew, but my experience changed around 180 degrees. And it was really that turnaround where I thought, I can't be the only one, right, who's gone out and try and create a business to, live life on my own terms and do something that's meaningful and that's really, fulfilling in that way, but falling into a trap like that.
mm-hmm.
Somebody else falls into a different trap. For me, it was the people pleasing. Other people have money things. Oh, I'd rather be a good person than make money. That isn't going to help when you charge your clients. Other people like, oh, well, if I'm good enough, you're going to have trouble handing over things if it's never good enough and stuff like that. So everybody has their own traps.
Right.
But yeah, that was really the moment when I thought, I want to support anybody I can, anybody who's on that path, make help them have a better chance of actually making it happen.
Mm. So, I mean, it's fascinating to me that you reached this point where everything was so hard. You're in an economic downturn. You're ready to throw in the towel, but you realize it was about making a different choice, that you had a choice. So you stayed in the sewing business?
Yeah, for another few years. Yeah,
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 got
yeah.
it. And
Mm-hmm.
then you added, how do I
Yeah,
help other people through
yeah,
this
yeah.
process?
So and that was quite a long transition,
Yeah.
because the sewing business was what was paying the bills, right? So, and while that is the case, you kind of have to keep on your little hamster wheel, and it took a while to, and then I thought, well, how people say, oh, you should write a book, and I'm like, yeah, but that's about my story, and that can only
Mm.
maybe inspire someone to a certain point, but it isn't helping them on their journey. So I thought, no, that's not it. But then, yeah, coaches do that. And that's when I did coach training, and then sort of slowly started to transition, as the coaching ramped up, the sewing went down. And so that took some time, and then you go through your emotions, you have your moments of impatience, and it isn't going fast enough. But what I noticed was that, you know, tech stuff kept creeping in. Like, it wasn't
Mm.
something that I was kind of consciously seeking out. It
Uh-huh.
was almost, I was looking towards people with some creative passion or some mission, because I noticed quickly, like, it isn't about a sewing business. I don't really care what you do. What I do care about, that you're really passionate about it, right? So, and I don't really care what the passion is. And so while I was looking initially focused on all these, these creative, crafty people, over here, people kept, like, literally like pulling and say, can you help me with this? Like, I'm overwhelmed with this website. Yeah, but that's easy. And then people, oh, what, I don't know, what microphone do I need for, like, a podcast? I'm like, don't need it. That's easy. I can help with, but it was almost like reluctant until I
Mm-hmm.
really saw. It's like, oh yeah, it's such a hurdle for people.
Yeah.
And especially in the last few months, with everything that's going on, and everybody all of a sudden scrambling to get their stuff online, and people sort of jumping into this deep water and swallowing water, and they're being sold solutions that aren't right, and they
Oh,
don't know who to ask, and they don't know who to trust. And so the more I've seen it, and I thought, oh well, isn't that nice how it all comes around full circle?
right. The technology landscape. I mean, there's so much to choose from. There's so
Mm-hmm.
many alternatives. I think it's super easy for people, especially if they are trying to do some of it themselves, or they're even just trying to map, what do I need? It's
Exactly.
so easy to just hit that moment of overwhelm pretty early in the journey.
Yes, absolutely.
Especially if
Absolutely.
they don't want to be spending time in tech, especially if that's
Yes,
not real. It feels like, this have to do, not this want to do. Most people are not just like dying to dig into a bunch of tech, right?
absolutely.
It,
Absolutely. Yeah,
it,
no, people, yeah, and especially when you have so many things to think about, and and people often, oh, I want to run workshops. I want to, the last thing they want to worry about is API case for this Stripe integration, right? So it's just not something that they want to deal with. But what I've noticed is that people usually jump to the tech way too soon, right? It's as if you think, oh, I want to build a shelf. Let's go to the hardware store. And you walk in, and it's like, holy, there's so much stuff there, and you don't even know where to start. And it's only overwhelming because you don't even know who to ask. Because if somebody comes and asks you, okay, what shelf do you want? Wood, metal, how big, what do you want to, how much weight, and all the questions you don't have. And when you don't have answers for these questions,
mm-hmm.
it means, like, well, you're not really ready to go shopping. you know? And most people, because I think that's also what's been sold, get your clients using this tool as if the tool is the thing that gets them there, right? So and people are, I don't want to say tricked. In a lot of cases, the intention is probably good, but they are pointed to the tools way too soon. And all these other questions that need to be thought about before you even look at tools, you know, they always want to make it sound easy, because nobody buys something when they say, well, it's going to be complex. You can do it, but it isn't, so everything is quick and easy.
Yes.
You know, it, it's sold as quick and easy, and it always feels as if, well, the complexities are like shoved under the carpet. And it makes people feel more stupid in the end, because when they actually dive in and think, oh Jesus, I don't get this. This doesn't feel quick and easy to me. And then they think they're stupid.
Well, and everybody is in love with their own tool, right? So it's a little bit like I joke because I just a couple months ago I was at an event with these gentlemen who teach people how to have podcasts, and they launch them for them, right? But I remember, and I didn't really know them that well. We were just talking and they were telling me, "Oh, you need a podcast." And I was like, "I do?" Like later realizing like they're the podcast hammer, right? Everybody's
Yes,
a podcast nail. And I feel like in the technology world,
it's like that.
it's the
Absolutely.
same thing. Oh, you need this. This will solve your problem. This will,
Exactly.
and it's a little bit like seeing a specialist in a medical field. Like
Hmm.
they're going to view it through the perspective that they have about all roads leading back to this particular problem, and it just may not be the case.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a huge problem. And if you then, and I think it's also what makes people so reluctant and so, because it makes them feel vulnerable because they know, I'm prey here because I don't know. And if you don't know, you don't even notice you're being taken for a ride.
Well, that's right, and I think the journey also of saying, and I'm speaking from the perspective of being a consumer of tech services, like my choice is that I trust this person and make this decision, or the alternative is that excuse me, I have to climb this huge mountain myself just trying to figure out the landscape. And I
Exactly.
don't have time to do that, and I don't want to do that, right? And so I
Hmm.
think it's easier to make that risky decision of just going with something than it is to really dig in and try to understand the landscape. And I think it gets people into a lot of trouble.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think there's also what we talked about before, that whole idea of like, I'm a woman or I'm a certain age, where people somehow have that sense that this makes this more difficult. But when you think about it, it's actually, oh boy, they're going to take me for a ride. I really, I, when I first came, like when I first started the sewing business, I lived in Granada, and it's a little town, and it's really horrible for driving, right? So having a
Mm,
car is like is really kind of useless there. But so I thought to get around, the best way is really a scooter. But I was not a two-wheel person, right? Like I'd never had and I really thought it's the logic, like it's the sensible thing to do. And okay, buying a scooter, I knew nothing about scooters, but I knew that if I walk into a dealership, being a woman, being a foreigner, they're going to sell me the oldest duck they've got. So I thought I have to. I researched 6 months.
yeah.
I researched about the different brands, and it was all the different features, like whatever wheel size. Do I want this? Does this matter to me? Doesn't it? I knew that if I walk in that dealership, I need to know more about these scooters than they do, because
Yes.
otherwise, but then I did spend that time on it because I didn't want to end up with a scooter that isn't reliable,
Yeah. No, that's
so
it's a great example. And I think in certain areas, we're all more motivated to research or do that
absolutely.
homework than others. And tech tends to be one where people are motivated to have it. They want the
Yep.
solution right now, but it's really hard to invest the time that it takes to understand it ahead of time.
Yeah.
So, what do you say to people that are at that cusp of needing to make decisions and trying to figure out who do I trust? How do I approach this? Like, what advice do you have for folks that are in that position?
I'm laughing because I'm thinking, well, I've got a book for that because it's exactly what's in there. Like, this is exactly what this is
Perfect.
about, because it is showing them the questions they need to ask, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's also the things to keep in mind, the things to consider. And there's a whole section about how can you, how do you know enough to recognize a good specialist when you see one?
Yes.
What questions should they be asking you, right? And what questions should you be asking? And what is it that you need to think about before you even think about worrying about a tool, right?
I,
And so it's usually not what looks like a tech problem is hardly ever is.
yes. Well, when I train people, because I obviously speak on legal issues, and what I tell people is, and I usually speak to groups of entrepreneurs, like, how many of you thought at the start of your journey that you were going to have to become a sales expert and a marketing expert and a tech expert, right? Because it turns out that to be in business for yourself, you actually do have to learn a bit about each of those worlds and a bit about the worlds, but a lot about how those worlds apply to your particular
Exactly.
business, right? And the same is true for law. Like, you don't
Yeah.
have to go to law school, but you can't be in business and ignore the law, just like you can't ignore having to learn a sales conversation. You can't
Yeah.
ignore having to learn marketing. You can't ignore tech, right?
Exactly. Exactly. And you don't need to be an expert, but as you say, you need to know enough to, yeah, to even to be able to get help and be a good client, you
That's
know?
right.
So it time somebody's like, oh, I can you talk to so and so? She's struggling with PrestaShop, right? And and then when you look at it, no, PrestaShop's fine. It's like like there was basically someone she saw, like she had people coming, but they weren't buying. I'm like, sweetheart, that's not the PrestaShop problem.
Yeah, it's
That
not
is
the
you
technology.
connecting to your clients. That is you understanding how to build trust online so that people see your website and trust you enough to pull out their card. Like it's a totally different issue, and that's pretty common.
That's
People,
right.
quickly hide behind the tech and think it's a technical issue and actually I've had a conversation very much along the lines of what you just said about especially people who love sewing. It's very common. They start a sewing business because really what they want is they want to sew all day, every day.
Mm.
And then they realize, well, actually sewing is just that tiny little part of it,
That's
and
right.
because,
It's the
yeah,
Michael Gerber, right? The
mm-hmm,
E-Myth book and all
yep,
of the books that he writes about. We're all technicians in our own way. The reason that we come into a business or start a business is because we want to do a particular thing. And it
mm-hmm,
turns out we don't know how to run a business and do all these other things. So we have to either learn it or delegate it or
yeah,
whatever. But yeah, we're all really
absolutely,
technicians.
yeah. And you can I mean, I'm not the one to say, well, you should do everything yourself, and I'm all by
Right.
all means delegate, but you also need to know enough
Yes,
to
before you
be
can delegate
to be
effectively.
exactly. You can't, because I think I wrote a little ranty article about because there was somebody who said, it's like, oh boy, I wish I could just get some hire a 25-year-old and hand it all over. And I,
Yes.
oh, would this is almost like would you do the same thing with your money? Oh, I just get an
Yes.
accountant, give that, like, no,
No.
you don't have to be an investment expert, but boy, you need to know enough to know who you can trust with your money. Right? It's
Yes.
exactly the same thing with technology. You can't, it's your business. You can't hand over your entire business just because you're scared of an error message that you don't understand.
That's right. Well, and that issue, I think what you just spoke about, people just wanting to hand over this piece. I mean, I relate to that. I went through a painful journey last year trying to hand over a piece of, ownership over my technology, my business, and it didn't go well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, what we all need to do in our businesses, I mean, my perspective on this now is we need to own the map and we need to hire people and put them into our map,
Exactly.
right? But if we
Yes.
don't create the map, things are going to fall apart.
Yeah. Because other people will, it's your business. It's like
Mm,
you need to take ownership, and you are the one who will act in the best interest of your business. Other people will act in the best interest of their own business.
that's right.
You can't trust that they will put your needs in front of their own.
Well, and even if they are, I feel like even if they are heavily invested in serving the client,
Mm-hmm.
you still, if you haven't done the investigative work to know what you need and what is going to serve you, or at least what you want your client experience to be like, or whatever, and find solutions for that, you're still relying on somebody else's vision that you don't entirely understand. And
Exactly.
that may not be a fit for your business.
Yes, absolutely.
So talk to us about the ways that you work with your clients right now. What are the types of things that you're doing with your clients?
my work's mainly one-on-one. I've got a
Mm.
few small groups, but the thing I really enjoy is the one-on-one work because, you know, even when I was sewing, like the thing that I loved was the bespoke. It's not about
Mm.
reinventing the wheel. It's about, learning all the things and knowing best practices and then really tailor a solution for that particular, business owner. And most of the time people come to me because they have some tech monster to tame,
Yeah.
right? It's usually they have an idea for something, oh, I want to run a workshop, or I want to have this kind of business. But then, okay, there's a lot of enthusiasm and I can relate to that. But then, like, how do I bring this, like, okay, what do I have to do tomorrow to
Yes.
actually make it happen? What tools do I need? How do I put the whole thing together? And so most of the time they come from with some tech problem, or they're looking to build the kind of business that I've got, where they say, oh, you've got what I want, right? So, and it
Mm.
is more, but at the end of the day, it's always got three pillars. It's always okay, there's skills, there's strategy, and I can help you flatten that learning curve. But there's always that other part to it that, well, call it, I say, well, recognize that when you're building a business or anything, that it's a creative process, right? And you can't expect it to be a straight line, and it takes the fun out of it, to be honest. But it also, like, you have to embrace that dance in the unknown. And
Mm-hmm.
after learning what you need to learn, in the end, you need to come to a point where you do it your way, because that's the only way that you can really step into your power and flourish and really not just like, am I doing it right? Because you're doing it somebody else's way. So you need to kind of get beyond the learning what other people have done. And
Mm-hmm.
so, yeah, I just can't help but point people in that direction, because I think it's where the magic is. And when the two parts come together, then, they can really fly.
Well, I love that. I mean, really bringing the person into their own business as a decision maker,
Mm-hmm.
right? Versus somebody just implementing other people's strategies and systems, and here's the path.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love your description of who you work with. You work with creatives, authors, coaches, healers, and other passionate, free spirited, open minded souls, usually with a strong analytical mind, who are passionate about their craft or mission but find building a business around it challenging.
Yeah. And it's often that relaxing into that creative process, and also learning to trust your own judgment,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's a difficult line to find, because when I've changed careers so many times, like, I know what that feels like when you're new, when you're the baby, like, you don't know anything. So obviously you're going to look at others for direction, and you're going to look to learn, and you study. And find that moment when, like, you've absorbed enough, it's
Yes.
time to close the books. You can now
Yes.
trust that what makes sense to you is actually trustworthy. So I think a lot of people struggle letting go and drifting
Yes.
over there, and really embracing, even embracing that uncertainty, because, when once you stop following somebody else's path, like, you're on your own.
That's right.
And people shy away from that. But then at the same time, if you look at anybody who inspires you, they've all done that. They've all, like, Bruce Lee jumps to mind. He studied all sorts of martial arts. In
Mm.
the end, what it came down to is, be water, my friend. Right? It's like, yeah, now you beyond the strategies, and you just, embody what you're creating.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because that conversation, like, you no longer need to consume. You don't need to keep learning and reading. And there is a
Yeah.
point where you just have to create. You have to
Yes.
make the decision. There's a woman, a client who I've worked with named Tara Moore. She's written a book called Playing Big. Phenomenal.
Yeah, I'm on her mailing list, I think.
Are you? She's brilliant, but phenomenal discussion around especially how high achieving women tend to stay in that consume, like, I need one more degree, I need this one more thing to show that I'm capable of doing X, Y, and Z. Or, it's really about taking that leap. She moves women through that fear conversation really beautifully, but it's on this point. Like, there's a
Yeah.
point for all of us, male or female, that, like, yes, consuming so that you've got enough chops to be skillful in making your decisions is helpful. But there's a point for all of us in our own businesses where we just need to decide and we need to create.
Absolutely.
I love
Absolutely.
that.
Yeah.
So talk to us for a minute about, and for anybody listening, the way to contact Anke. I'll have Anke. Excuse me. I keep now going to the other side. I had it right the first time. The way to contact Anke, I'll have all of your links wherever they need to reach you, as well as your gift on my show notes page, which is legalwebsitewarrior.com/podcast. But talk to us a little bit about your gift and where you like to show up online for people to connect with you.
Well, my free gift for people is a free copy of my book,
Which
PDF copy of my book, Taming the Tech Monster.
And I love the title. I think it's the perfect title. And the cute little
Yeah,
monster that
yeah,
you actually have on the book is just
yes.
perfect.
And you'll laugh because I have a face mask now with the tech monster on. It's yeah, he takes on a life of its own, and the reason he looks so cute is because this is basically the message of the book. What looks like this
Ah,
scary tech monster is actually just a friendly little dragon who wants to play. And so yeah, there's a free PDF copy of the book for anybody who finds tech frustrating at times.
I
And
love that.
it's easy to find. It's ankeherrmann.com, my website. That's sort of my home base, but I'm very active on Facebook. I'm very active on LinkedIn. Tamingthetechmonster.com is the companion website for the book. So there's also the links for the book. So
Oh,
that's
awesome.
also a free community to join, and where you can ask these questions that you might be embarrassed to ask elsewhere. And yeah, LinkedIn, Facebook. I'm a little bit on Instagram, but not really big. But yeah, it's easy to find.
Okay, perfect. Well, I will share all your links. For people wanting to search Anke online, though, your last name Herrmann is Hermann.
It's double R M
Oh,
A double
double
N.
R. Okay, I'm glad
Yes,
you
yes,
pointed that out. I knew there
yes,
were
yes. So if
doubles.
you Google me, you'll find me quickly. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, that makes it easy. Thank you so much for joining me today and talking about your journey and about tech. This is just such an important conversation for people because so many, I have another friend that I talked to recently, and so many, especially women, really have a hard time sorting out this part of their journey.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it can cause lots of problems in business. And so we need folks like you to be like,
Oh, for
you
sure.
you got this. It's
Yeah.
easy. I will help
Yeah.
you. I will show you how.
Yeah. And people, like, a common reaction is, "Oh boy, I never knew this could be fun."
Right.
It's my guilty pleasure now,
Yeah, I
right?
love
Because
that.
they kind of see through, well, what made me think I could do that, right? I do a lot of things where we actually do it together,
Yeah.
and it's just so much fun.
Oh, it just takes all of the heaviness of it away. I mean, that's what's
Yeah,
perfect about
yeah.
working with somebody like you. So, thank you,
Thank
Anka.
you so much. It was
Yes,
awesome to talk to you.
so great to connect with you, and I look forward to being in touch. We'll see each other online, and I'll follow up. Awesome.
Absolutely fabulous.
Bye
Thank
bye.
you.